The agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Today on the show, peace in the Middle East, strong signals that the Kurds and the Turks are about to show us how it's done. That and more today. It's time to talk. A new major league arms dealer, China, is now the world's fifth biggest weapons exporter, on the heels of Germany in sales, but still behind the U.S. and Russia. Today, China and Asia, the world's new weapons hub. Well, they may very soon be laying down their weapons in the Kurdish-Turkish conflict. News is expected this week of a truce to end 30 years of violence. Last week, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, freed 8 Turkish soldiers in a move that Ankara praised. Now, that may just have been the beginning. The imprisoned leader of the Kurdish rebels has promised a historic announcement on Thursday, and all bets are on a ceasefire. Well, less fighting in the world, the timing could not be better as the United Nations declares this Wednesday the first International Day of Happiness. Does modern life leave time for the pursuit of happiness? And what makes a people happy? Well, the answer is not found in GDP. The Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan has devised a gross national happiness index, showing that the poor may be the richest. Well, I've invited 3 people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. And my first guest spent a year researching what it takes to make people happy, and I think he's brought some suggestions with him to the show. I'm happy to welcome back here to Agenda Christoph Koch. He's author of the book, and I'm translating it from German here, How I Tried to Become the World's Happiest Person. What a great assignment to have, Christoph. Were you unhappy when you started searching for happiness?
I wouldn't say I was unhappy or a very sad person, more of on the grumpy side, maybe. People, when their telephone rings, they're, somebody's calling me, exciting. And I was more like, what is it?
And now you're happy to get a phone call.
More than a year ago.
Okay, good. Well, we're going to talk about that transformation in just a moment. My second guest says it is very likely that the PKK will announce a ceasefire in Turkey this week. I'm happy to welcome to the show Mehtap Sürler. She is a Turkish affairs expert and a political scientist here in Berlin. Mehtap, does a ceasefire, which you think will come this week, does it mean lasting peace is going to become a reality between the Kurds and the Turks?
Both the PKK leader Öcalan and the Turkish government are highly motivated to strike a peace deal now. And if there's to be a peace deal, it should be done this year. And both sides are highly motivated. Okay,
well, we'll see if we'll talk about what's going to have to happen for that peace to become a reality. That in just a moment. And my next guest says China's rise to power has the rest of Asia rushing to arm itself. I'm happy to welcome to the show Carina Somimirano. She is with SIPRI, which is the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Carina, your research shows a frenzy of weapons selling, buying in Asia. What's going on here? How much of this is fueled by this fear of China, and how much of it is fueled by economic policies to generate jobs?
I think it's both. Some countries are looking very carefully to what China is doing in terms of acquisitions of military equipment. But there's also an attempt to link some of these arms imports to producing domestic industries that would allow these countries to have a better economic and military standing.
Yeah, I mean, it does indeed have to do a lot with keeping people unemployed, jobs, and weapon sales. You will not find political leaders holding speeches on the value of keeping people employed by ramping up the sale of guns, tanks, and fighter planes. But new data shows that Europe is doing just that. In this age of austerity, some countries are seeking to export equipment that they can no longer afford to maintain. Portugal is seeking buyers for its new fleet of F-16s. Spain has put its Eurofighter Typhoons on the market. And the chances of finding a buyer, they're pretty good, especially in Asia.
According to SIPRI, China has now replaced Britain as the world's fifth largest arms exporter. Shipments have grown dramatically in the last 4 years, and China now has a 5% share of the global market. Experts say a lot of advanced Chinese-made military equipment is now comparable in quality to that made in Russia or in the West. Germany currently ranks third on the arms exporter list after Russia and the US. Like arms makers in Britain and France, German exporters have suffered lately, in part due to austerity measures in Europe. The report also says that compared to the preceding 5 years, the global volume of arms sales and transfers grew more than 17% between 2008 and 2012. Countries in the Asia-Pacific region bought the most equipment. They accounted for close to half of all arms imports worldwide.
Karina, what are we seeing with China right now? Is China trying to couple its economic rise with also becoming a world military power?
I think so. I think there's definitely a geopolitical component in China in seeking to maintain a regional power over the Pacific area. And so many of the latest acquisitions might seem to be oriented to demonstrate this new military power. But I think it's also because China not only is importing weapons, but it's becoming, as the SIPRI report says, a very important exporter. And that means that they are developing their own industry and they are becoming a little bit more autonomous in designing new and sophisticated weapons.
And they're generating a market as well, especially around them. I mean, we were talking about how a lot of Asian countries are arming themselves, worried about China, but at the same time they're buying weapons from China.
Yes, and that's the interesting dynamic, right? I mean, some of the countries in the Asia region are the main customers to China's weapons, and this is specifically the case with Pakistan, right? But also China is expanding to new regions like Africa as well, and most recently Latin America with some deals done with Venezuela. But yeah, definitely you can see that some of the smaller countries neighboring to China are potential customers at the same time.
At the same time as being worried about China. What about this dynamic between China and Pakistan right now? Pakistan buying, in your report you say, buying an incredible amount of weapons from China.
Yeah.
Where does that put China and India?
It's difficult to say. I think both China and India, as part of the BRIC powers, right, this emerging economic powers, are looking and trying to position themselves in a much more powerful way in the region and beyond. And I think Pakistan here clearly is a kind of the third party, not in the sense of power or search or anything like that, but it might change the dynamic of the market.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously there's competition going on right now. These BRIC countries are wanting, particularly China, wanting new customers. So China has to compete with countries such as the U.S. and Russia to find new customers, doesn't it?
Yes, they are. I think all the new suppliers or the largest suppliers are all the time on the search for new markets and offering different type of weapon systems and trying to offer the best deals and perhaps offering the possibility of technology transfers. That is something that the importers countries are very interested.
I want to pick up on technology in a moment, but first let's bring it over from China here to Europe. European countries trying to save money. They're cutting budgets left and right. That means they're trying to unload a lot of equipment that they can no longer afford to maintain. And you say that makes it a buyer's market right now for weapons.
I think it is a buyer's market right now, mostly because Western countries are not desperate, but they are really, really proactively looking to see how they can get rid of some of the surplus equipment and some of the equipment that they can no longer afford to maintain.
Is that dangerous for the world?
I think it might, because you need to ask yourself, why is it that a country is buying weapons? Is it because it really needs them, or is it because it's just a prestigious thing, or it's just an economic or political deal?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at orders for buying, for example, I mean, obviously you look at the motivation, and countries don't go on shopping sprees just because they get a good discount on fighter planes, do they?
No, there might be other motivations, but the truth is that sometimes there's a lack of transparency in what motivates a state to buy weapons. And so they might say, we are trying to modernize our armed forces, but at the same time they might have some hidden intentions in either position themselves vis-a-vis other country to have a much more bargaining power, perhaps in negotiations, economic, political, or diplomatical negotiations.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and we see that. And, you know, Maytap, I can pull you in on this. The sale of weapons obviously gives a country a lot of power leverage over another country. We see what's going on in the Middle East right now with the conflict in Syria. Syria would not be able to stand its ground against the rebels if it didn't have Russia, for example. That dynamic, I mean, it's really hard to underestimate the power of that dynamic, isn't it?
Yes. It gives arms sales gives the military power, not only economic powers but also political power. And if it is not democratically controlled by the parliament, by the civilian authority, the arms sales can increase also the potential of the powers to prolong conflicts and also to spread violence.
They can last longer
in the region. Yes.
And are you worried when you look at a situation such as the Turks and the Kurds? That conflict, it looks like that conflict could soon be ending, but that conflict can be irritated and made worse by the proliferation of cheaper weapons that we were talking about.
Of course, in that report, Turkey, it said that Turkey is the largest third largest arms importer in the Middle East after the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And it has been always, Turkey has been always in the top 15 of the, in the list of the top arms importers.
Right.
And to date, the Turkish military has a monopoly on the decision of arms procurement, arms production, and defense expenditures.
It certainly has to be worried, though, about the position the Kurds could have with so many cheaper weapons being out on the market.
Of course, in the market, of course, this also affects the accessibility to cheap weapons, makes both sides. Not only the Turkish side, but also the PKK side, make them more powerful, more access to prolong the conflict.
Karina, but before we wrap things up, obviously we have to bring up the United States. It is still the world's biggest exporter of weapons and arms. Now, where do drones fall into this? It is a big topic in the world right now. The U.S. gets a lot of criticism about drones. Are drones considered weapons?
We at CIPRI are starting to look at drones technology, and I think it's precisely because it's becoming such a hot topic of discussion nowadays. And I think it will become perhaps part of our analysis, and it would be interesting to see where all these discussions draw the line between what's a weapon, is it necessary to have them, is it necessary to count them, what are the ethical implications for the use of drones in the future.
What about accountability? Because I know with weapons and arms, there are ways of tracking those. But drones kind of throw those rules out of the water, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I was reading an article yesterday, very interesting, a U.S. former general saying precisely what are the consequences for international humanitarian law on the use of drones, because there are conventions for war, for the rules of war, and so it's very tricky to see where drones would fall and whether new legislation would be necessary to make the use of drones accountable to the society and to the government as well.
Is there any country in the United States, or in the world rather, that threatens the U.S.'s position as the world's leading arms exporter? You were telling me earlier that when it comes to innovation and advances in weapons, the United States is number one.
Yeah, it's still by far the country that produces the most sophisticated weapons in the world. And so I think it will take perhaps some generations for another country to catch up to what the technology is available today. But so far, it's a market pretty much dominated by the United States, and it's precisely because of the quality and the technology that they use in their weapons.
And before we move on, we want to pick up on what we're going to talk about with Turkey and the Kurds. What is, CIPRI, your institute, what are you thinking when you look at the situation in the Middle East, particularly with Syria right now and the proliferation of arms, and the fact that the West may send weapons to the rebels?
It's very interesting because as you know, there's a current embargo on Syria, especially from
from the EU, but France has threatened to break that.
France and the UK have been signaling that they might be against the renovation or the renewal of the embargo due to the escalation of the conflict. They would like to sort of start arming the rebels, or at least they have suggested that. Right. I think it might be dangerous. It might escalate the conflict even more if you open the market for weapons.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll be talking about weapons in that area, of course, for a long time to come. We want to move on now to a figure who has been behind bars since 1999. He and his group are considered terrorists by Turkey, the European Union, and the United States. And yet this week, Abdullah Öcalan, the leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, is the greatest hope for peace in the Middle East. Öcalan says that he will make a historic announcement this Thursday from his prison cell. And Turks, Kurds, and the international community expect it to be a call for an end to 3 decades of fighting that he has championed.
In what's being viewed as a positive response to a new peace push by Ankara, Kurdish rebels freed 8 Turkish prisoners in mid-March. The prisoners had been held for 2 years in northern Iraq. The Kurdish insurgency has lasted for nearly 3 decades. The PKK had originally fought for an independent state to be carved out of southeastern Turkey, but have more recently moderated their demands to greater autonomy and cultural rights. Kurds make up some 20% of Turkey's 76 million strong population. The Turkish soldiers were released after jailed Kurdish rebel leader Abdullah Öcalan last month said that he hoped they would reach their families. Öcalan himself has been in prison for 14 years. Hopes are now high that the end of the conflict, which has claimed more than 40,000 lives over the decades, will soon come to an end.
So, Mehtap, you think we're on the road, we're in the final stretch now to peace between the Kurds and the Turks?
Yes, it is expected that Öcalan will call on his organization to declare ceasefire and withdraw the troops from the Turkish territory this Thursday. It will be...
Why do you think? Why is he doing that now?
Because it's the high time for him. He has been since 14 years in the prison island in the Marmara Sea, and he controls his organization, and he is a leading figure of the Kurdish nationalist movement. But if the peace talks prolongs without result, then it might be the case that he loses his power to persuade his base.
So this is actually, you're saying this is his final chance to exercise control.
Yes. because the PKK is commanded in the Kaunas Mountains by Murat Karayilan in northern Iraq. And if Öcalan loses his power to control his organization and the Kurdish movement, it might be the case that there appears multiple power centers within the PKK, also within, in general, in the Kurdish movement at large. And
who's more afraid of that happening, Öcalan or Erdogan?
Yes.
Who's more afraid of that?
Yeah, both of them. Both of them are highly motivated, therefore, to strike a peace deal. And for Öcalan, he wants to maintain his power, although he is in prison.
But what's going on there, though, Mehtap? Is it more about maintaining the power, or is his cult of personality? He is the face of the Kurdish resistance. This is his last hurrah, isn't it? If he cannot make history this week, then he will be discarded and thrown into the history books, right?
But not that quickly, maybe. He has significant influence over the Kurdish movement, although he has been in prison in the last 14 years.
But he's not going to get what he wants, is he? I mean, if he says there will be a ceasefire, which there has been before, we would have to add.
Yeah,
several times. But let's say if this one lasts, he's still not going to get an independent state. What's he getting from Turkey? What's being negotiated now that is so good that Öcalan is willing to say, stop fighting?
Yes, he wants, of course, he wants to influence the peace process and the peace deal this year, because he wants, the PKK has abandoned the idea of an independent Kurdish state.
Yeah, that's off the table.
Yes, and now the demand is on democratic autonomy. And it means for the PKK reaching a status for the Kurds in Turkey.
So kind of like an autonomous state within a state.
No. It is more decentralization.
It's decentralization,
Well,
but still Ankara still has final authority.
Of course.
Right?
And it has been debated. I mean, the Kurdish movement, I think, has to make it more clear what it's meant by democratic autonomy. It is self-determination, then what will be the practical consequences of this. But there's a sort of constructive ambiguity. And it has the purpose of, this ambiguity has the purpose of keeping the whole Kurdish movement under the peace process. And
okay, but explain that a little bit. I mean, you're saying that the demands, as well as what are being given, the demands from the Kurds and what's being given by the Turks are ambiguous on purpose. And they're doing that because it does what? What's the purpose of that?
I mean, the democratic autonomy and this demand and where it will lead to is uncertain. But the Turkish state is highly centralized, and any movement towards decentralization, more power to local authority or more power to municipalities, would only improve governance in Turkey. But on the other hand, the Turkish the term democratic autonomy or self-determination fuels the Turkish fear that the Kurds want an independent state, and therefore this must be made more clear during the peace talks, and it must be also communicated to the people.
Okay.
But what now concretely, what Öcalan wants to get are democratic reforms. More democracy, more rights, granting full rights to education and public services in mother languages, judicial and legal reforms, and constitutional reforms.
Okay.
Like changing or sort of officially the Turkish.
Let me just interrupt you for a second.
Yes.
You're saying basically what the Kurds are asking is for recognition of minority rights in Turkey.
Yes, and Kurdish identity.
And recognition of the Kurdish identity. But that is incredibly threatening to the Turks, isn't it? Because the Turks are obsessed with having one Turkish identity. Isn't that what is really the crux of the matter here, is allowing the Turkish identity to open up and include the Kurds?
Yes, I mean the Kurdish movement wants that this ethnicity-based definition of nationhood in the constitution be removed, and that is now currently being. The Turkish constitution is being redrafted by a parliamentary commission, and the pro-Kurdish Peace and Democracy Party is included in the making of the new constitution.
So this is huge. This is huge, though, isn't it?
But it might be the case that these peace talks will not produce concrete results for an autonomy, but the whole democratic reform process since the last decade already gave rights to Kurds, also the rights in their mother languages. And
but what are you telling us, though, Mehtap? So actually, this deal of peace is going to mean for the Turkish state bigger changes than it's going to mean for the Kurds, right? I mean,
sure.
That's what you're telling us. We're talking about huge changes. I mean, these are symbolic changes. But this is huge for Erdogan to say, okay, we will agree to this.
Yes, sure. But as I said, since the last decade, the Turkish, the Justice and Development Party has enacted lots of reforms. It has not been under peace talks or under negotiation with the PKK, but they started the Kurdish opening. It failed at that time, but then they continued the process with further steps, not big steps though.
But it's been gradual.
But it has been a gradual approach.
Is this a role model? Is this a template for the rest of the Middle East? Could the Israelis and the Palestinians, could they learn something from the Turks and the Kurds?
I think, yes, I mean, the Justice and Development Party has denounced the its Islamist roots and has become a conservative center-right party and made successfully lots of groundbreaking reforms in Turkey. And I think, yes, it can be a model of democracy for other parts of the Middle East.
I mean, are you hopeful that this could spread, that this positive development could actually become contagious in this region?
Sure, if this peace deal will produce results, if there will be a peace deal and it will be held, of course, that will be a huge leap forward for the whole region.
And of course, it will definitely be a cause for happiness. I mean, I have to pull Christoph in here. He's been, patiently watching us talk about arms, weapons, and fighting. But this is definitely something that could increase happiness in that part of the world. And, it brings us to a big question that I think everyone is interested in. And what does it take to make you happy? Well, the United Nations thinks that question should be a priority of policy leaders, not just in Turkey, but in every country. It's highlighting that this week by designating Wednesday as International Day of Happiness. And yes, there is a connection between money and happiness. The UN says that policies that fight poverty and make everyone a part of economic growth are keys to being happy. If we agree on just what happiness is.
People in many parts of the world are living longer, healthier lives. Billions of us are connected by technology in new and unique ways. Life in the 21st century is exciting and more stressful than ever. But the downside is that modern society's demands can be overwhelming. Burnout and depression are affecting growing numbers of people. Despite all the technological advances, happiness remains as elusive as ever. Movements to change the basic focus of human endeavor are gathering momentum. One government has even made it official policy. In the 1970s, Bhutan introduced a new measurement of national prosperity. Instead of gross domestic product, the Himalayan country gauges its success now on gross national happiness. A meeting in 2012 convened by Bhutan set plans for an International Day of Happiness in motion. Now the UN has adopted a resolution calling for it to be given greater priority. And March 20th has been dedicated to inspiring action for a happier world.
I mean, I have to ask all of you, gross national happiness. Look, I mean, you're all smiling when I say that. It feels better than talking about gross domestic product, doesn't it? Do we agree on that? Christoph, what do you say?
I think so. I think it's a good idea to take that and to focus as well and not just think about, how everybody can make more money, because research found out that that's not the only thing that makes us happy.
So what does make us happy? I mean, you took a year to find out. So tell us what you found out. I'd love to hear what makes us happy.
The premise was there are so many guidebooks and everybody has their little theory, and the idea was to just take a year and just try as many different things as possible. I tried laughing yoga and went to India and learned that. I dug up a garden because people say that makes you happy. I took pills because people say they make you happy.
What kind of pills did you take?
Antidepressants.
Okay.
And there's a debate going on. If you're not depressed, do they help at all?
Do they make you happier than the laughing yoga?
The laughing yoga was making me happy in the moment while I did it, but it didn't have really like a lasting effect.
But so you would advocate the antidepressant pills instead?
No, of course.
Okay.
I can't go on television and
but
advocate taking.
But it's interesting though. You experimented with the antidepressants, and you said you felt happier. You felt better.
I felt more outgoing in a way and more extroverted, which some people would say is a basic thing for happiness, in contrast to staying always just introverted with yourself. But as I mentioned in the book as well, it's nothing to just take lightly and try at home without real supervision.
Yeah, we're not advocating that at all, especially to the children watching. We're not telling you to take pills. But what else did you find in your year that makes people happy?
Yeah. One thing that surprised me was that engaging with others and doing volunteer work made me much happier than I'd expected, because I think we just saw it on television. There are so much more things going on. Nobody has time. Everybody's stressed out. So if you add something else to your weekly workload, you would assume, well, it's just one more thing that stresses me out. But by going to a senior citizens home once a week for 2 hours, just doing something completely different, actually it made me happier. And that was one of the things that had a lasting impact, in contrast to the laughter yoga, which was fun while it lasted, but afterwards pretty much was wearing off pretty quickly.
And why? Why did it last?
I'm not sure. I think it might be because on the first look, there's nothing in it for you. You're just giving something away, in this case, your time, and don't get anything in return. You don't get money. You don't really, learn a new language or do anything that sort of improves your life. Then at the second look, you see, well, it was just spending time with another person who maybe don't as anybody else, that improves your life just as much.
And isn't it interesting when we talk about happiness? I mean, I've heard this in many conversations and in many books about the topic. People always end up coming back to the notion of time. Having time is something that makes you happy. I mean, would you guys agree with that? Having time is an ingredient to being happy. You're smiling.
I mean, it depends on how you spend that time. Having time is important, or it's a high currency. Time is a high important currency, but yes, it depends on what you make out of it.
But do you?
Well, I think that we're running behind our careers and our goals and our objectives, and I think we forget to stop sometimes and have the time to sort of look what's going on in our lives and enjoy a little bit. I think it's quite difficult in these times, and especially with all the technological changes that sort of pull out us from interacting more with people, even.
But are we doing that more? I wonder if we aren't coming full circle. I heard a very good talk a couple of weeks ago about we are learning how to share again. That in the beginning of time, humans had to be social to survive. We then, on our way to modernity, we learned how to be alone, isolated, and be individuals. And now through technology like social media, we're now reconnecting with people, and we're actually sharing things now more than we ever have before. Is that maybe an indicator that we're becoming happier?
Well, the interesting thing is that we're not becoming happier in the last 50 years, at least in Western society. We have reached a certain plateau, and it's not getting any better. We're making more money, we're getting older, children are getting taller even. Everything's improving except for the happiness, which has been pretty much around the same level for the last 50 years.
So we keep trying to connect with more and more people, though. I mean, that's what I see, particularly with younger people or anyone who's using social media. They're constantly trying to be engaged with other people. Is that medicine for a deep-seated unhappiness that we have?
It depends. I think you can use it that way. If you feel disconnected from the world, you can sort of create an illusion by I'm online constantly, I'm checking in with my online friends. You can create an illusion of closeness that doesn't necessarily have to be there. But it also can bring people together. I'm not arguing that it's there's no value in these online activities and in sharing, like you said. I think it's even swapping over into the real world that we see that online makes it easy.